The next steps. You must do all the lessons if you want to stand a chance at surviving. Without doing all the advanced lessons and then working on that knowledge within the community, you will not make any money. Without doing the fundamentals at the bare minimum, it's unlikely that you'll even keep the money that you already have, let alone multiply it. This is how important it is that you get through all the lessons. Now you've made it to the end of the tutorials. You're about to enter the crypto campus for the first time and unlock the beginning of the rest of your life. Now, when you get inside, make sure that you're getting into the general chat and you're introducing yourself to your fellow students. Our statistics show those students that introduce themselves actually go on to complete more lessons than the students that don't. This is incredibly important because knowledge is power, and this is how you are going to be making money. So make sure you introduce yourself to your fellow students. This is very important. Get in there, get into the general chat, talk to them, and I'll see you inside. By now, you should be prepared and you should have your brain ready to absorb all the information in the lessons. You have a lot of work ahead of you, and your journey has only just begun. So, welcome to the crypto campus, and let's get to work. MetaMask is a decentralized wallet. It's a hot wallet that you can put into your browser. That's it here, MetaMask. It's a fucking extension for your browser. And basically what this means is that you get to withdraw your cryptocurrency from centralized exchanges, put it into this wallet, and then the cryptocurrency belongs to you. Now, obviously, as a piece of software that exists on your computer, that doesn't make it invulnerable to corruption. It just means that it's a little more safe than having it on a centralized exchange where basically a corporation has control over your cryptocurrency and they can kind of do whatever they please with it. When it's on your MetaMask, you can do whatever the fuck you like with it. You can keep it, you can move it around the internet, you can do whatever you want with it. Nobody can stop you from using it. So this is the reason why we always suggest that you have a MetaMask. I'm not going to show you how to install it or how to copy down your seed phrases. There's prompts for all of that. It's easy, okay? I'm just going to take you through some of the basics, and mainly what the different parts of the MetaMask are and how to use bridges to go from different blockchains. So the main one that you're going to have MetaMask connected to is Ethereum. You'll notice that there's a drop-down menu that allows you to change between different networks. These are different blockchains. Now, Ethereum obviously is the main blockchain. Everything which is an ERC20 token will be on this particular network, which is the network that we use for pretty much everything. However, a lot of people notice that Ethereum is actually quite expensive. The transaction costs on Ethereum can be very high. So this is the reason why different networks and different blockchains were created. Polygon, Optimism, Arbitrum are all different kind of versions of Ethereum, you could say, that just have cheaper fees, okay? But not as many people use them because they're roll-ups and they're just not as popular, but that's okay. Optimism and Arbitrum are incredibly safe. Polygon is slightly less safe, but more popular. And you can move your cryptocurrency tokens from these different exchanges around how you see fit. I wouldn't recommend you use BSC, Binance Smart Chain. Fuck them off. You can use them sometimes, but I would recommend against it. But there's a whole bunch of different blockchains out there. There's too many to list, so I won't go through them all. Now, when you withdraw your Ethereum from your Kraken exchange or from your Binance exchange or from your Coinbase exchange or from whatever centralized exchange you have into your MetaMask, it's going to show up here as ETH. Now remember, because you're interacting directly with the blockchain, you need some Ethereum in this wallet at all times in order to pay for transactions. Otherwise, your tokens will get frozen in here and you won't be able to pay for the fees of the transactions in order to move them. So always have a little tiny bit of Ethereum in here. How much is the right amount? Nobody knows. Is it 0.1 ETH? Is it $100 worth of ETH? Is it $50 worth of ETH? Is it 0.05 ETH? I always personally keep about 1 to 300 US dollars worth of Ethereum in a wallet at all times, just in case. Sometimes you need more. Sometimes you need less. There is no right amount, okay? So don't ask me what the right amount is because there is none. You just need to know approximately what the gas cost is and then just kind of guess it. NFTs, you're not going to need to worry about that because fuck NFTs. And the activity tab shows you all the shit that you've done in the past. You've moved all of your tokens around. If you want to inspect a transaction, if it gets frozen or if there's any issues with it, you can click on that one. It'll give you details about the transaction and you can go to the block explorer and look at the blockchain itself for any issues. Now, we're not going to go into that. We're going to go and say, okay, imagine that we deposited another token in here and it's not on the list. Look, we only have Ethereum and USDC. What if we wanted to deposit, I don't know, wrapped Bitcoin, WBTC? How do we know if it's been deposited in here? Because when we bring wrapped Bitcoin from an exchange into our MetaMask, it's not going to appear here automatically. We're going to need to do it the hard way. Yes, that's right. It's not going to appear automatically. And you're going to be like, oh no, my tokens were lost forever. No, you search wrapped Bitcoin and you press the button and you say, yes, obviously we don't have any in the wallet at the moment, but if we did, you would click this, 0 wrapped Bitcoin, fantastic, beautiful, and then it appears in the list. Sometimes it will automatically detect it and you can just refresh it. Other times it won't. Remember, if you click on this and you hide wrapped Bitcoin, that doesn't delete the tokens from your wallet, okay? You can't delete a token from your wallet. It just is hidden, okay? It never disappears forever. It's always in there, regardless of whether you actually have it listed or not. Your tokens are always in here. I can hide Ethereum or USDC. It doesn't matter. They're still in the wallet. I just need to unhide them again by importing them or by using a custom token thing in there where I post the contract address. It's a more complicated version of it. Let's do an example. SHIB. Why not? Ethereum. Oh, look, the contract address is right there. Copy. We go into here and we paste. Look at that. SHIB. We click on it. Fantastic. We have 0 SHIB. Same shit as before. Beautiful. Amazing, right? So often you will need to move your tokens from one blockchain to another. Not everything we do is going to be on Ethereum. What if I told you we wanted to buy the Crypto Raiders token? Token symbol ticker Raider. We would go to a exchange like I told you, Uniswap. And let's say I wanted to convert my Ethereum into Raider. Right? Now we look at this thing. There's no Raider here. Ticker, Raider, Raider Inu, Raid, or Dom Raider. DRT. Raider is not here. So what the fuck is going on, you might ask? Where is it? Well, like I already taught you, you go to the markets tab and you look for it. Oh, well, would you look at that? It's on, not only is it not on Uniswap, it's on a different DEX, it's on SushiSwap. It's actually on Polygon, proof of stake, either by via wrapped Matic or wrapped Ethereum. Well, it looks like we're gonna need to use a bridge. So how the fuck do we get our Ethereum from Ethereum to Polygon? Because if we go over to Polygon, we don't have any Matic or wrapped Ethereum. Matic being the cryptocurrency that you pay for the fees on the Matic, the Polygon network. It's a little bit confusing, I know, but we need to use a bridge. Now, obviously, you can use the MetaMask integrated bridge. Feel free to use that if you want. The fees are incredibly high. Don't come to me crying that you paid too much in fees or that you got money taken away from you. You can use Swap in MetaMask as well. The fees are very high, so it's convenient, but the fees are very high. So you're going to pay for the convenience, okay? Don't come to me crying that they took your money away. So you can use a service like multi-chain. There's a whole bunch of different bridges out there. Multi-chain's been around for a while. You want to go from Ethereum to Polygon, wherever the fuck Polygon is. So just search for it. Polygon mainnet. We want to convert Ethereum into, preferably I'd like to convert it into Matic. That would actually be the easiest way of going about it. We might do that actually, because remember, you always need to be thinking one step ahead. What did I tell you before? Raiders is on Polygon. Polygon network requires Matic as fuel to pay the gas for the transaction fees. Currently, if I was to move my Ethereum from Ethereum to Polygon, we would have Ethereum and no Matic to pay for transaction fees. So what I'm going to do is I am going to convert some of my Ethereum into Matic. A little bit. Let's say we wanted $38 of Matic. That's still a bit too much. The Polygon network does not require very much in terms of fees at all. Cheap network to use. Boom. Transaction submitted. Easy, okay? Now all we need to do is wait a couple of seconds while this transaction goes through. In the meantime, while we're waiting for our Matic to appear in our MetaMask, let's prepare the bridge. So now, instead of Ethereum, what we actually want to send is Matic. Matic from Ethereum to Polygon. Sometimes it doesn't automatically swap around the right things, so we have to do it manually like that. Let's double check on the transaction. It's just finished just then as I looked at that. Okay, we're sitting here and we're asking ourselves, okay, where is the Matic? It should be in this wallet, right? Well, refresh the list. Look at that one new token found in this account. Matic, amazing. Boom, beautiful. Now what we're going to do is we're going to send all of our damn Matic over the bridge. Unless there is a minimum. Cross-chain amount is 5 Matic. Why is it not detecting my Matic? Sons of bitches. Let's refresh the page. Beautiful. Send it over the bridge. We have to approve it first. Max, Next. $1. Cool. No problem. No problem. From here, it's going to approve this, and then we're going to perform the bridge, and then I'm going to pause this for a very short period of time and fast forward through time. Swap, please review. We're going to from Ethereum to Polygon, sending Matic to pay for our transaction fees. Confirm, pay $2. Cool. Now we wait until this is all complete. Okay, fantastic. Our process is all done. You can see that the bridge was successful. Now, if we look in our Polygon wallet, we will have some Matic in there. Whoop, for a second, we had millions of dollars worth of Ethereum. That's okay. Sometimes you will get accounting errors or readout errors in your MetaMask, and it will show you having millions and millions and millions and billions of dollars. That's okay, it's just a user interface error. Now that we have Matic on Polygon wallet, which is very important, obviously for Optimism and Arbitrum, they use Ethereum to pay for their transactions. You need to be familiar with whatever token is on that network that you're trying to bridge to. If we were to go onto SushiSwap, which I won't do because that's kind of out of the context of this entire video, you would be able to now transfer your Ethereum from Ethereum, your Ether tokens from Ethereum into Polygon now, and then commit that to SushiSwap and then perform a transaction to get your rated tokens, if that was what you wanted. The point here is that you need to be not only familiar with your MetaMask and the assets that are listed in here, but you also need to be familiar with the different networks that it can connect to. If you are trying to connect to a network that you're unfamiliar with, you can use a trusted service like multi-chain or a different type of a decentralized exchange in order to do that. A very easy and fast way is to do it like so. I'll perform one for you right now. You click on Ethereum and say, I wanted to connect to Avalanche, and I don't have the network currently set up in my MetaMask. Notice how Avalanche is not an option on this list. So I click Avalanche, and it will suggest the preferred connection details to my MetaMask automatically. I approve it. Switch to the network, and after a moment of it thinking, you will find that it will be here. Look, native token for the network is AVAX, so it tells you, beautiful. See how easy is that it tells you what the native token is. Got it. Now Avalanche is an option in this fucking MetaMask. Excellent. You can repeat this process for as many different networks as you like. I suggest though that you stick to the main ones, which we need, which is basically Ethereum, Polygon, Optimism, Arbitrum. That's pretty much it. You don't need any of the other ones. Maybe Binance Smart Chain, but that's under very rare circumstances. So, this has been basically an introduction on how to use your MetaMask. Thank you for listening. I receive questions a lot like, hey Adam, where does this token come from? Where do I buy this token? I don't know where to find this token. So on, so forth, forever. People not knowing where to look for different tokens. The process of finding where to buy different tokens is very simple, because you're not always going to have the exact exchange required for particular tokens. Sometimes they're sold in different places than other places. What you need to do is go to CoinGecko and search for the token that you're trying to find. Please give me a moment while this thing is verifying. Let's say you're looking for something incredibly weird and esoteric, like, I don't know, Dusk, just as an idea, right? You may be on some random exchange, I don't know, I don't care what exchange you're on, you could be on Kraken or Coinbase or whatever it is, right? You've seen what I've done here. I've searched for the token, I clicked on it, and then I went to the Markets tab. When you scroll down, look at this! Oh, wow, all the places on Earth where this token is being sold by all millions of different types of exchanges. Some of them are centralized exchanges, which are corporations. Other ones are decentralized exchanges, which are operating on the blockchain. What you do is you look over to the right-hand side where it has the volume and the trust score. Typically, what I like to do, because I'm a whale and I like to purchase things in high volumes, is I go to the volume and I sort by the volume tab from highest down to lowest. And then I look at the trust score as well, and I see where is the place where I can get this token from. Now, obviously, number one, it's a centralized exchange. It's Binance. They're doing 60% of the global volume for this particular token, whatever the hell it is. And if I wanted to find a decentralized exchange, I would look down this list and see if I can find the next one that's a decentralized exchange. Now, the first one that comes up on my screen here is PancakeSwap. Now, they're only doing $34,000 worth of volume a day. 24-hour volume. $34,000 worth of volume a day. So that's not very big. Neither is Uniswap, which is the next decentralized exchange here, only doing $22,000 of volume a day. Now, clearly, if I'm a whale and I'm buying, hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of Dusk token, I'm not going to have enough liquidity over a 24-hour period even to purchase these tokens. So what I'm going to need to do is probably go to Binance, purchase the tokens, and then withdraw them from that exchange and put them into my MetaMask, which we will cover in a different lesson. Likewise, you may find that this is the other way around for some tokens. Some tokens you're going to look for and they're not going to be sold on exchanges, and they're only going to be sold on decentralized exchanges. An example of this would be Hex. If you look at Hex and you pull up the markets tab, you'll find that if you sort by volume, you're not going to get a centralized exchange because nobody on a centralized exchange provides Hex as a token that you can buy or sell. So instead, you have to go to a decentralized exchange. Look, Uniswap is the one that has the highest 24-hour volume. They have $1 million worth of volume and they do 39%. And then V3, different denominations. There's a lot of volume here that you can use. So this is a different example to the Dusk example. Whatever it is, I don't care. You look up the token, you go into the markets tab, and then you look at which exchanges have the token that you're trying to get access to. A quick note, if you're trying to purchase one of the major tokens, say something that's in the top, 30 tokens, or maybe the top 20 or 30 or 40 tokens. Most of this shit here on the market cap ranking is going to be listed pretty much on every major centralized exchange, and you're not going to need to look too hard for them. But when we start to get into the smaller cap shit that goes beyond 100 in the market cap rankings, maybe into the 200, 300, 400, you're not going to be able to find any of that small cap shit on a major centralized exchange. You're going to need to use decentralized exchanges for that. But generally, this is the overall principles that you should use. Make sure you always search for a token, then go into the markets tab and find out where it's being sold, and then make your decision based off that. Hello, my friends. This is a quick video describing how we're going to just look at a few different factors with the strategy testing. Important notes. So please remember these. They're all very important. So important developing notes here. When we're doing strategies, we want to make sure, oh my God, fuck off. When we're developing these strategies, we want to make sure we're starting from the 1st of the 1st, 2018, or at the most, a couple of months before this date. I want you to use the price series KuCoin, BTC USDT. The only reason why I'm asking this is because most strategies don't have an inbuilt date restriction function. So you'll just have to use this price series because this price series here is the one that's closest to the dates that I want you to use. The reason why I'm asking you to use a 2018 price series from the start of that year is because I believe that price action prior to 2018 during the 2017 gigabull market is not representative of what crypto will look like in the future. And I'm talking here specifically about the unconstrained run-ups for multiple years on end, the insane bull markets that we used to see where, we just sweep up for multiple years. I believe that cryptocurrency as an asset class is becoming too big for this type of effect to persist into the future. If you need more evidence of that, look no further than the last Bitcoin cycle bull peak, which was a rounded peak instead of a peaky peak. Now that is a sign of the changing times. So yes, it's more likely we'll have a diminishing cyclical returns unless we have a total societal collapse and a hyperbolic expansion of BTC as the global reserve currency. At this point, you become an instant billionaire with no skill just from holding. So we don't really need to optimize for this scenario. Okay, moving onwards. Making sure the strategies do not repaint. Okay, the definition of repainting in a strategy sense is where the strategy falsifies the past. Okay, this is like a coding error or an error of the strategy running the simulation. So to check for whether the strategy is falsifying the past, you need to look into the code and see if it uses a function which calls future prices into its calculation. Alternatively, you can also use the lookback function in TradingView to check whether the behavior of the strategy through the past moving forwards changes. You have to carefully watch for any changes in the dates or of the historical signals as it moves forwards. you might find a buy signal on the first of the month. And as you're using the look back function and you're going further and further and further away from it, suddenly you'll notice it goes from the first of the month back to the 31st. And of course, that wouldn't make any sense because the signal can't drift backwards in time. Even if it went forwards in time, that wouldn't make sense either. You want all of the signals to be sticky and to truly represent what they mean. Repainting is just where it suddenly decides, oh, it's not what I meant in the past, and I'm going to change where I made the signal. No, absolutely not. Can't have that happening. So the integrated strategies from TradingView will not repaint. These are the basic ones that you get with TradingView, the ones that aren't developed by the community. The integrated strategies will not repaint. They're very simple, and they've got a high quality degree of coding in there. So you'll find that the custom strategies from the TradingView community will often repaint while appearing to perform way better than the integrated ones. This can happen a lot. And I should also mention, guys, that when you're going through this process of developing your strategies, this is a quick note. I don't remember whether I covered it in Unit 9 or not, but please use the TradingView community strategies. This is an endorsement. I want you to use the TradingView community strategies. Yes, some of them will repaint, but this is part of the process. This is the reason why I'm bringing this up, is because the TradingView community strategies are better than the ones that you will get than the integrated ones, but you'll need to do this checking process. Okay, so repainting can mislead you into thinking the strategies are better than they really are. If you do not know how to read the code, that's okay. You can do a little bit of investigation work instead. Go into the comments section on the popular strategies and look through the comments, and you'll often find a discussion between different users who are trying to figure out whether or not the strategy repaints. Most people find out quite quickly, and you don't need to do too much investigating work. So I find this as the most leveraged use of my time if I'm doing the same type of research. I implore you, do not skip this step. Your final portfolio is only as good as the quality of its inputs. If the strategy is corrupted and you do not know, it will not make you money. Build your empire on rock, not on sand. Moving on. Strategy review. Okay, so when you're sending me your strategies and we're having a discussion about how we're reviewing them, I want you to send me through two screenshots of each strategy so that we can have a look at them. Okay, so the first screenshot that I want you to send me is an overview of the trade price action with the equity curve in the lower 2/3 of the screen. Here, I'm looking for return distribution, clustering, and time frame issues. Okay, so if I've got this price return series here, and I have, say, 20 trades over here at the very beginning, and then it doesn't fire for the rest of the time the strategy is running until it gets over here, and it fires another 10, there's something seriously wrong with that strategy. If you've got an entire 2.5 year period of time down here where nothing happens, clearly there's something wrong with the strategy, and you cannot delude yourself into thinking that it's a decent strategy. So this screen here gives me a bunch of information that I want to look at as far as the equity curve as well. For example, if we're looking at this one, we can see that the majority of the returns come from a single trade. Now, this is not what you would call a very high quality strategy. We want the accumulated edges from all of these different trades to be the thing that gets us to where we're going. We don't want a single outlier to be the thing that generates all of our returns and then skews all of our return efficiency numbers. It's good, don't get me wrong, it's making money. And while it's not making money, it's staying relatively flat. So that's good. We want to see that. However, we can probably do better than this. Anyway, moving onwards, I want to see this number 1 and this number 2. Summary statistics from maximum drawdown downwards. Okay, so you'll scroll around and you'll find maximum drawdown. I want you to push that to the top and make it the first entry. And then we look at all of these down through here so that I can see all the way down as far as possible. It doesn't matter whether it ends down here at percent profitable or whatever. But yeah, maximum drawdown from maximum drawdown down. So here I'm looking for minimizing the risk and maximizing the return efficiency. So the Sharpe ratio, the Sortino ratio, the profit factor, percent positive, and trade numbers, things like this. Note that I will never look at the nominal returns or what the average gain of each trade is in either percentage or nominal dollar amounts. These do not matter, okay? These don't matter. I don't care how much the strategy makes. That's not what we're maximizing for here. It will make sense later on when we get you into the private masterclass group, because the return efficiency is all that matters. We can make an infinite amount of money if we have a super high return efficiency. It's not about trying to naively maximize the amount of money that the strategy makes. This is what an amateur would do. We're professionals and we have secrets to the universe. So we increase the return efficiency up to its maximum. And then when we put it into the portfolio and combine them all together strategically, we can then adjust the exposure of the account, and we can basically dial in however much money we want to make with virtually zero risk. Insane when you think about it. However, you'll find the secrets to this as you proceed further forwards into the masterclass. Final notes. You can increase your total portfolio performance by including more uncorrelated strategies. So you don't have to have just Bitcoin and Ethereum when you're going forwards. You can also have tokens like XEM, BNB, Aave, Doge, 88, LTC, for examples. Altcoins like this often have bizarre price action, which is great for algos or strategies, but shit for buy and hold investing. Litecoin is a great example of this. It's actually not even that good for algos and strategies, if I'm being serious. But yeah, atrocious for buy and hold, not so good for algos and strategies. XEM is great for developing strategies on. It's actually quite sensitive to strategy development. It's very good. So moving onwards, important to use long-only strategies if you're facing altcoins and tokens that don't have a liquid futures market, because a lot of these strategies incorporate longs and shorts, as you can see, longs and shorts. And if we're using something very small, like you might even use something a lot smaller than XEM, maybe even a shitcoin or something. I do not recommend that, of course. I only recommend you use large tokens because they have liquid futures markets. But yeah, you can use the long and short positions on tokens with liquid futures markets. XEM is a borderline illiquid market. It's very, very small. But yeah, it's one that works very well with strategies from my experience. So that's one that we'd like to use, but one that we can't use with a massive multi-million-dollar account. With that being said, yes, that's all I needed to cover. Okay, talk to you guys soon. Welcome to the lecture on the statistical significance of repeating events. We're going to be covering a bunch of different principles during this lecture, such as what is a repeating event, why are they significant, how to determine significance academically, and how to determine significance subjectively. Pre-warning, we're going to be using a lot of stock market examples in this lecture because the stock market has tons and tons of historical information that's already being used. Cryptocurrency has lots of information, obviously. However, less of it has been pre-done for me, and I wanted to get this lecture out to you guys as fast as possible, so we're going to be using stock market information and a couple of crypto examples in there later on. So let's ask the question, what is a repeating event? Well, when it comes to investing, a lot of people try and deduce the outcome of a certain event using logic. For example, if a hurricane hits the United States, then it's going to cause a lot of damage, it's going to ruin a lot of people's lives, therefore the stock market is going to go down because of all the damage and the lack of economic activity that it's going to cause. However, logic doesn't always work. This is the reason why so many people find it so hard to make money, is because they're always trying to rely upon their logic or their qualitative analysis rather than doing the statistical analysis. So, in this sense, wouldn't it simply be easier to look at all the historical examples of that circumstance that you're looking at, and then simply see what happened after those all on average, and then take that position? Example number one. The hurricane example that I just mentioned when it comes to the United States, you may be surprised by the actual outcome. I have the statistics here. Look at this table here. You can see that if you bought the stock market and you waited a week, you would have actually made money instead of lost money after a hurricane had hit the United States. Doesn't that outcome not make any sense logically? Of course it doesn't. However, the stats don't lie. This is the reason why sometimes looking at the stats and the historical precedent of these events and the circumstances that are surrounding them can actually lend itself to more interesting analysis and reveal certain things that we wouldn't have normally expected. Obviously, this is revealing extra alpha to us, and the alpha is what we're trying to get to. This same type of analysis on repeating events can really be performed on anything that had happened more than once. Obviously, the more samples, the better, but we'll get into that in a minute. Here on the screen is another example. Here is a more complex example where at least out of 4 of the previous 8 days, we had all the sectors positive on the same day, and it led to a 1-year return on the stock market of 9%. Pretty good. If you're a stock investor, that would be a pretty decent return on your investment. Not good enough for us crypto guys, but this is an example of how that can be beneficial for you. Now, the question of what makes the data significant. We can collect an infinite amount of information. We could have a couple of samples, or we could have thousands of different samples, but we need to know whether or not it actually means anything. Well, technically, the statistical significance of a catalyst or a repeating event of any sort should be determined by the probability value calculated based off how extreme the observed data is from what the expected values are. Now, I promised in this masterclass I wouldn't force you to do any mathematical analysis any more than you would necessarily need to, so I will still keep my promise and keep everything in the stats section and not make you do any maths. However, I would recommend that you look into this if you do have the time, because it will help your understanding of how we know whether certain things are statistically significant or not. So what we're going to do, instead of force you to do the maths, we're going to do some subjective analysis to figure out whether or not something is significant or not, so that we can look at the data, we can have it, and then know whether or not we should keep it or throw it away, act on it or not act on it. So what makes the data significant from a subjective approach? I have a 3-factor quantitative method for determining the significance of a data set subjectively. This is frequency, magnitude, and outcome ratio. Rule number 1, frequency. 1 event is interesting. 2 events is a coincidence. Multiple repeating events is a relationship and something that must be explored. We want the frequency to be as high as possible. If your sample size, which could be defined as frequency, is too low, then you may not know whether or not you're looking at a coincidence or not. But if you have a very large sample, you have a very high frequency, then you can know for sure, or at least have a high probability of knowing whether or not that relationship is something that you can genuinely exploit over a long period of time in a repeatable manner. Number 2, the magnitude of the effect. Let's use a simple mathematical example. If the long-run rate of return of the stock market is 10% and the standard deviation is 5%, and you have an observed value of 15%, that's within 1 standard deviation of what you would expect. So I wouldn't consider that significant. However, if you have a return that is, say, 20%, that's 2 standard deviations away from what you would expect. In this sense, you can see the magnitude away from the expected return or the expected value that you would normally see in absence of a special circumstance. This is going to show you another factor as to whether or not it's significant or not. And number 3, outcome ratio. This really is another way of saying the percent positive or percent negative depending on the outcome that you're actually trying to observe. Therefore, if you had something that was a 50-50 coin flip between 2 different outcomes, that's not really significant. But if you had an outcome ratio that was highly skewed, let's say 75% of the time it was positive, or maybe 75% of the time it was negative, and you have maybe greater examples on both sides, so maybe it's 80-90% positive or negative, these heavily biased outcome ratios are a sign of something repeatable occurring, something above randomness that makes it more significant. Within the subjective methods, we also have qualitative factors. For example, is there reason to believe that there's some sort of causal relationship between these 2 things? For example, if a hurricane hit the United States and the stock market went down, and you have a significant quantitative relationship, then from a qualitative standpoint, you would say, well, that obviously makes sense. And we're going to exploit that because there's seriously a causal relationship between a destructive event and a lack of economic activity leading to the destruction in the value of assets. Another very basic and true example of this causal relationship could be, is the Federal Reserve or the government printing money and stimulating the economy in any way? Are they deploying monetary policy? Are they deploying fiscal policy? This should cause the stock market or Bitcoin to rise. If we have a statistical outcome, say like every single time they started printing money, the market went up by a certain percent, then this would be a good qualitative analysis, something that means something, and you could probably expect this relationship to actually occur in the way that you expect it to. So what we're going to do now is we're going to look at an example. We're going to walk through it together so that we can look at how we're going to use these certain principles to detect significance. And this is a good example because it's a contradicting example. These 2 data sets were taken from Bitcoin on the same day. Now let's go to the charts. So you'll see one here, which is the Bitcoin USD after synthetic VIX crosses 200% for the first time in 3 months. And we have BTC USD after the crypto fear and greed index goes below 12. Now, you can see that with the first example, which is a bearish example, you can detect this by looking at the median and seeing how it's in the red, or the Z score down the bottom and seeing how it's in the red, that this is a bearish example because it is triggering most often at BTC highs rather than the lows. Now with the crypto fear and greed example, you have a positive example. You can see that the median is positive across the chart, across all the different measurements, plus we also have a positive Z score in the black instead of red. So let's think about our different considerations: the frequency, the magnitude, and the positive outcome ratio. Number one, and the most obvious one, we can see that the frequency is much higher for the fear and greed index. We have many, many more samples. Number two, the magnitude. You can see here that for 1, 2, and 3 months, on both of these, the crypto fear and greed index is actually far higher. We have a far larger outcome in the positive direction than we do in the negative direction for the first example. And number three, the percent positive ratio. Percent positive, obviously they're going in opposite directions, so we're going to expect different numbers here. But you can see, for example, in the 1 month time horizon for the fear and greed index, we have a 96% positive ratio out of all these different numbers. Whereas for the 1 month, we have a 20% positive ratio, which would be the equivalent to an 80% negative ratio. And you can repeat this for the same ones. You can repeat this for 1, 2, and 3 months. This is mixed, obviously, but for the size of the sample and for the magnitude, obviously the fear and greed one wins. Also, when it comes to the fear and greed index being below 12, this qualitatively makes sense because when it's low, it should be cheap, and when it's high, it should be expensive. This isn't always the case. However, this is the outcome that makes the most sense. It's not what you would describe as a direct causal relationship. This isn't necessarily people putting money into Bitcoin. It's just a measure of sentiment. However, you can see how the relationship would make the most sense when the indicator is low versus when the indicator is high. As far as when the synthetic VIX is crossing 200%, you can make any number of different interpretations here. However, this is more of a statistical oddity. You can argue that perhaps it should work better on the bottoms than the tops. However, we could discuss this all day. The point is, this is a great example of two different data sets that are conflicting, and one is probably more superior to than the other, and that would be the fear and greed index. So what can go wrong when we're looking at statistical significance of repeating events? Well, the main one is frequency. Now, the main consideration is that having a repeating event does not isolate the specific effect that you're looking for. It can only dilute away all the other variables that are happening out there in the real world. It may be a total coincidence that every single time you take this sample or you take this observation, that something else is happening in the background. There's no way of performing this analysis where you isolate that one particular factor in the real world. You can only take the largest possible sample to dilute all the other effects that may be contaminating your analysis. In practice, this means that a confounding variable could easily modify or corrupt a study with a sample size of 3, but this same confounding variable would have a much harder time, if not impossible time, contaminating the results of something with a sample size of, say, 1,000. Here's an example of two things working together that should have never been combined in the first place, which is discretionary technical analysis combined with an incredibly small sample size. You can see here on this Bitcoin chart where you have the lines drawn wherever they are, for better or for worse, you have essentially a sample size of 2, which this individual here, whoever he is, has combined this oscillator with the price action. And really, they're implying that a curve up on the third result is going to result in a bull market. Now, not to say that this analysis isn't inherently true. However, because the sample size is so small, it can be safely disregarded because it does, for sure, have no statistical significance whatsoever. A sample size of 2 is simply not large enough. An example of performing technical analysis where you do have some sort of significance, or you are approaching a high level of significance, would be systemized technical analysis, not discretionary technical analysis. On this screen here, you can see this is an example of systemized technical analysis where we have a super trend strategy with a sample size of 85. This is 85 closed trades, and you can see the cumulative performance of the strategy here. You can argue whether or not 85 is a large enough sample. However, this is far better than having a sample size of 2. And even when we looked at the other examples earlier in the lecture, we didn't have 85 samples. We maybe had like 20 or 30 samples at the max when we're looking at the fear and greed index. So obviously, the more the better. We always want to have more frequency, and we don't want to have small samples mixed with discretionary technical analysis. Please don't do this. Now, this is the fun part. What can go right? Now, if you layer these certain statistical edges together, you can actually uncover incredible things. I know this through first-person experience, where I have accumulated lots of different statistical edges and then combined them together and layered them so that all the probabilities are actually accumulating towards a single result. You want to have lots of catalysts. You want to have lots of ideas so that you can use them to make fantastic decisions. So I normally leave story time until the end of the lecture, but I'm going to tell it now. So back in 2020, I was performing a collection of statistical analysis on the stock market. My goal for this statistical analysis was to figure out when the exact top of the stock market was going to be. I accumulated a whole bunch of different repeating events, from yield curve inversions to changes in leading economic indicators to changes in monetary policy and a bunch of other little esoteric things sprinkled in there. You can see on the screen here, this is an actual screenshot of the sheet that I had when I performed this analysis. And you can see it was essentially cumulated averages of how far away the market peak dates were going to be versus these different statistical sets. And that was an attempt at figuring out when the top of the market was. So the standard deviation was obviously very wide, and this is pretty shit, clearly. However, you can see how precise this was for something that's almost as impossible to detect as the peak of a stock market. This analysis allowed me to get out of the market and actually perform a short trade at the right time, which made me a whole shitload of money, which was fantastic. This was a bespoke system that took me a very long time to collect all the information from, and I was continually refining it and monitoring it for many months, many years in forward testing. So this is a great example of how you can use the statistical significance of multiple things actually combined together. The point that I'm trying to make, just in case this isn't clear, is that each input into this model actually had a whole bunch of different repeating events attributed to them. For example, the yield curve inversions. There was many yield curve inversions that I could take average readings from and then reverse engineer where the date of the market was going to be. So I'll show you some of the data that I used for this. We have a table here which shows you the average inversion to the S&P 500 peak using yield curves. We have the 10-year to 3-month yield curve. We have the 10-year to 1-year yield curve, and we have the 10 and 2. So in summary, logic has its limitations. It can be far superior to take a repeating event from the past and actually form a statistical expectation of how significant that is and then use it to make decisions moving forwards. Significance can be determined subjectively by frequency, magnitude, and outcome ratio. Significance can also be determined by the expected qualitative relationship. Ask yourself, is there reason to believe that there should be a causal relationship between these two factors? If there aren't enough data points, if your frequency or your observations in your sample size aren't large enough, then it will be very vulnerable to confounding information and confounding variables. Edge stacking in practice can be an extremely powerful method for finding secret positions in the market to take actions. However, it can involve a lot of research. This is a fantastic method of making big macro moves, and I encourage you to see this as a line of research and study that you should pursue in addition to everything else that I cover in the masterclass. Thanks guys, I'll talk to you soon. Now let's talk about systemization. What is systemization? Systemization is either a manual, semi-automated, or fully automated process where you collect all the information necessary to make an investing decision and you create a system with it. So you bring the probabilities in your favor by using the most amount of information. Preferably, each form of analysis that you're bringing into your system would have a sufficient history so you can perform some sort of a back test on that, whether it's statistical or whether it's visual. Systemization almost removes all of the human elements to the investing process as well, which is fantastic because this allows us to make better quality decisions without our biases or our heuristics interfering and contaminating with the outcomes. Now, while technically systemization is more of a method rather than a single form of analysis, it's so important that I believe it deserves its own lecture and its own place within the analysis hierarchy. Now, to get you to understand how systemization works in practice, what we're going to do is we're going to look at a casino analogy. Using casinos is fantastic because they operate basically how like an investor or a trader wants to operate. Now think about all the concepts that go into running a casino. Basically, you have a collection of machines and they all are running 24 hours a day. They all have a slight edge to the house, whether they're going to make you lose more frequently or they're going to make you lose in larger magnitude. What we want to do is we want to take this same concept and we want to flip it in reverse so that we become the house and the people on the other side of the equation, the people who are in the market trading against us, they're the people who are gambling. You can see this is the reason why I've spent so much time trying to tell people to be the house and to not be the gamblers, because by definition, systemization is the antithesis to gambling. We are trying to make sure that the odds are in our favor so that we can make the most money. Now, a problem with owning a casino is that we know naturally that the wins and losses for the machines that we're operating are going to be random. Say we open up a casino and 4 people walk in through the front door. You might have one person that loses money and then the other 3 people win money, which means we need to pay out more money than we made and we're already at a loss and we're like, casinos are a scam. This business is a waste of time. Why would I want to own a casino when I could be a gambler instead? Look over there. There's a couple of people that have been gambling and they won our money back. Obviously, we know this is not the correct way that casinos operate from a business perspective. We understand that over a long enough period of time, when the sample size starts to increase, then we will receive the average return of our casino or our slot machine or whatever it is those people are playing on, because we know that there is an edge to the house. We just need to wait long enough for it to happen. Now, here's the problem. If we only have one slot machine and those 4 people came in and they all played the one slot machine, we might need to wait days, weeks, months, or even longer for the accumulated average returns to even out so that we actually make a consistent, on average, profit from that machine over the long run. This is not ideal, and as we know, casinos have more than one machine. Obviously, the solution, like I've alluded to, is to have more than one machine. If we have a casino filled up with hundreds of slot machines, then as all the people crowd into the casino, the accumulated odds will almost immediately condense into our favor. You can see a representation of this on the chart that I have on screen right here. We have approximately what would be all of the different machines. We only have 10 trials here, but imagine this with 100 or 1,000 different machines. And the form of stable chaos that you have here, everything is very random at the very beginning, and then it quickly condenses towards the center, where our average probabilities become more in our favor, or whatever the slight edge to the house is. You can see that the more machines we have, the faster that we can condense the probabilities and bring them into our favor. Another way of saying this is to have more of these machines or more edges that we're working with. It brings the probabilistic returns of that system closer to the present day because we don't have to wait as long for it to actually reveal itself. Naturally, this should be applicable to investing, as you should be able to connect the dots right here. If we have a lot of indicators, if we have a lot of different types of analysis and we bring them all together, we can start to create a system where we're making money more sooner rather than later, using the accumulated probabilities of all the different analysis types that we have in our system. Now, just quickly, I want to mention that the astute students amongst you will recognize that this is essentially an application of the central limit theorem. You can see here this chart on the screen as we have a number of trials increasing from 5 to 30 to 90. You can see as the amount of trials increases towards infinity, it coalesces around the mean of 1, which is the theoretical edge that we have. Obviously, the numbers are arbitrary, but the more edges that we have, the more indicators we have, the more things that are properly calibrated to give us an edge. And that's key here, not to just fill a system with trash just for the sake of having more edges. Obviously, you can have 10,000 broken slot machines and they all are giving more money away than they're receiving. We want to have quality edges. We want to have as many of them as possible so that we can accumulate these odds and have them in our favor. Said again, the investing application for this is obvious. We don't want to just have one macroeconomic model. We don't want to have just one statistically significant model. We don't want to just have one sentiment model. We would prefer to have 100 of each of these and as many different types of models or indicators or analysis types as possible, because we want to make sure it's as unfair as possible in our advantage. So how do we bring them all together? Let's look at a couple of the basic principles and concepts of systemization. So point number 1, your system when you create it should be semi-automated or fully automated. Obviously, if we're adding complexity by increasing the amounts of edges or the amounts of indicators or analysis types that we have in there, very quickly it's going to become difficult to control. And we don't want to be trying to conceptually understand everything at once. There's a limit to how much working information the human minds can contain at any one point. So if we have a spreadsheet, we'll fill the spreadsheet full of all the different indicators and all the different things, and we will use the spreadsheet as, say, the semi-automated system that keeps track of all of our stuff for us. The side benefit of this is that when you have a sheet that contains everything and you're not using your brain's working memory to try and contain and sort through this information and then deploy it, you're also removing the biases and the heuristics that you may be accidentally deploying into the market without your conscious control. Point number 2, you can use diversification to your advantage. When you're systemizing and you have a big list of things, you can see whether you're over concentrating on one style factor over another. Say you have too many statistically significant factors and you know that you need more macroeconomic factors or more sentiment factors. You can see this visually and then you can weight them appropriately. So this is another advantage. Number 3, you can have time horizon classification. So you need to make sure that the systems, the edges, or the analysis types that you're using are appropriate for the time horizons that you're trying to operate over. If you have things that are operating over different time horizons, then you can have constructive and destructive interference between these different signals, and they can actually cause problems. Of course, they can reinforce each other and that they can double confirm certain things. However, when they're in a form where they're having destructive interference, this can cause issues with your models. I've had this previously where I've had to work through it and then separate certain features from different systems so that they're operating over the correct time horizons with respect to each other. Some long-term, some medium-term, some short-term. Last point, systemization can also unlock edge multiplication. So this is where you have a whole bunch of different edges running together, and we're looking as to whether the average signal is going to be telling us to do one thing instead of another thing, or whether the probabilities are this significant in our favor or not. But we can also stack these with other effects, such as passive rebalancing or optimal asset selection. There's a bunch of other ones, but we can cover those later. Just a quick note on sequential versus parallel signals. Just to open your mind up, we're not going to go super deep on this because it's far too complicated for this one lecture. Most of the signal-based processes in your systems will be in parallel. However, passive effects such as optimal asset selection and rebalancing can classify as sequential edge multiplication. Obviously, edge multiplication is the preferred one because it's going to increase the probabilities faster in your favor than doing anything in parallel. However, finding effects that you can use sequentially can be quite difficult. Not many of them exist. As a very naive and quick example of what a very basic system can look like, I have an example here on the screen for you. This is an example of where you have multiple edges working together in parallel. You can have something, let's call it the masterclass system. You have on-chain 1 and 2, macro, sentiment, statistical, average, and technical analysis, or whether that is discretionary or systemized. You can see that what you can do is you can basically just take an average of all of these, and astute investors, astute students will recognize what this is leading to. This will be covered in the medium-term section of the masterclass, which is coming up. We won't dwell on this for very long, but this is a good example of how you can include things in a spreadsheet and how you can keep track of them like so. Now, usually at this point in the lecture, I like to tell a story about how to apply a certain type of investing analysis. Truth be told, the principle of systemization has been the single greatest discovery and principle that I've ever used over the course of my investing career. Every massive gain that I've ever achieved, all the good things that have ever happened to me while investing have come from systemization. Every bad thing that's ever happened to me really has been the disregard of this type of methodology and this mindset behind collecting data and keeping track of it in a very systemized way, in a very emotionless way. So ultimately, this is the reason why I am so keen on this particular type of philosophy for collecting data and also using it for signal generation. So in summary, systemization is the ultimate method of being the house in investing, whatever market that you're getting involved in. It's a method of using multiple different inputs together at the same time, not just your one favorite indicator that you think looks pretty. Every problem is a nail and you've only got a hammer. That's not the type of methodology that systemization is. Systemization is having a big tool belt full of tools that you can deploy at any time, and you have lots of things working together in synergy. Systems that you develop should be automated or semi-automated in order to eliminate human biases and eliminate faulty decision-making choices that any person makes, regardless of your experience level. I believe that systemization is beneficial in this way because we are all humans. We can train ourselves to a certain degree to not make bad decisions. However, really, it's the systemization that allows us to completely remove biases to the highest degree. The edges that you include, the analysis types, or whatever it is that you include in your systems, they should be as diversified and uncorrelated as possible, while maintaining the amount of signal that you need, the amount of calibration you need for the time horizons that you're operating over. This is the reason why really good investing at the highest possible levels is incredibly difficult, because finding indicators or analysis types that operate over the same time horizons that are uncorrelated and diversified obviously by definition, is quite hard. However, the closer that you can get to this ideal, the more robust your systems become and the higher the quality of the signals that you'll have. Time horizons targeted by your edges should be coherent with the outcomes that you're expecting. If you try and mix different time horizons together from different indicators or different edges and they suffer from constructive and destructive interference, it may even be invisible to you. This is going to negatively impact the quality of the signals that you receive. Also, where possible, use the multiplication effect of layering different passive effects in your portfolios, like optimal asset selection and passive rebalancing. I'll be including more appendices on this later on, but for the moment, this is the end of the lecture. So I'll talk to you in the next one. Okay guys, welcome to the lecture on the news myth. Here we're going to be exploring different types of information and how we classify different forms of information so that we can use it for maximum profit. Let's get into it. Okay, so we've all been there before where something happens and the market goes skyrocketing or the market goes crashing. And it's a big deal and everyone's freaking out or everyone's celebrating and the question is crossing your mind, well, why did this happen? How did this happen? Where did all of this come from? I know, you say to yourself, let's go check the news. And then you start to think about it some more, you're quite interested in the event, and you say to yourself, man, if only I knew that that event was coming, then I would have been able to make a huge amount of money from it, or I would have been able to save my money, or whatever it is. And you think to yourself, well, the news knows what's going on, so I'm going to keep reading the news. Let's look at some more news. Let's keep finding more and more news. News. And you go super deep down the rabbit hole. You'll start asking me questions like, hey Adam, what's the best Twitter accounts to follow for crypto news? What's the best crypto websites to go to for crypto news? What's the best YouTube channels to watch for crypto news? What's the best TV channels to watch for crypto news? And you'll be looking, obsessed with getting as much news as possible. Now I get it. It's understandable. You're trying to express the foundational principles of what we're actually trying to do here into its real form, which is collecting information, getting an informational advantage, and then expressing that into the market for a profit. So you want to be collecting as much information as possible. And it seems like news is a fantastic source of this because there's a constant flow of information that is being filtered and refined by other people so that you get the information that's relevant to you, right? Makes sense. Now, the problem is that not all information is made equal. Remember, the market is competitive. So, if we know that not all information is made equal, then how do we classify news? How do we know whether the information quality that we're receiving is actually to its highest standards? Well, that is the magic question. And what we're going to do is we're going to explore the different information types. So we will be able to figure out whether or not we're actually receiving something that we can use or whether it's something we should disregard. So, and this is the key point of the lecture, there are only 3 different types of information in the whole world. You have leading information, you have coincident information, and you have lagging information. Leading information can classify historical and recent information and gives an indication as to what is happening right now and in the future. Coincident information can classify historical and recent information and gives indications as to what's happening right now, but not in the future. Lagging information can classify past information, but does not give any indication of what's happening right now or in the future. Now, with this already being discovered, you can start to think to yourself and say stuff like, oh, well, okay, I didn't really think about that. The way that we classify information is actually super important to knowing whether or not what we're looking at is actually useful or not. Clearly, and the first couple of things that are going to come to your mind is that leading information is good, lagging information is bad, and coincident information is, not really here or there. But we can go a little bit deeper than that. So, because of market competition that we've previously discussed, we can make the reasonable assumption that all lagging and coincident information is going to be priced into the market over shorter time horizons. This is reasonable because of all the people who are trying to express the same views as you, we're using bad quality information over a very competitive time horizon. So I think that that's very logical. Now, our research has also shown that as you move further out into your time horizons, that the competition is less. Therefore, it would be reasonable to assume that leading and perhaps coincident information will actually be useful here. So it's not only a case of which information is the most useful, but it's also a case of what time horizon you're using this information over as well, which makes it useful. This means, of course, by definition, it's reasonable to assume that lagging information doesn't work over any time horizons either. Now let's talk about price. Price in itself is its own fascinating and very scary phenomenon, because price by itself, as we have discussed previously, is actually an indication of everybody's expectations, which is being priced into the market. They are all incentivized to express as much information as possible within the price. This means, by definition, price is actually a leading indicator. And through this, you can start to see why this becomes a little bit of a problem for us, because when we are investing, when we're trading, the expression of our actual activity is to try and predict the price. So you can see, by definition, this is actually going to cause us a problem, because what we're actually trying to do is to actually predict something that is already predicting what the market is. So we're trying to predict something that's already predicting. You can see here that this is a great expression of why investing and trading is such a difficult activity. You're actually trying to get ahead of something which is, by definition, supposed to be one of the things which is furthest ahead of everything else. Of course, this doesn't mean that it's impossible. This just means that it's very difficult. A little bit of effort is not going to work. You need to have a lot of effort in order to overcome these negative pricing effects, in order to get ahead of your competition. So, just to round this out, I want to use a couple of different examples of leading coincident and lagging indicators, just so you can get an idea of what this looks like in the real world. So a couple of my favorite leading indicators are things like macroeconomic forecasting, the ISM PMIs, so this is the Institution of Supply Management Purchasing Managers Index. This report is actually something where they go out to companies and they ask purchasing managers what their intentions are for the future, or like what conditions they're seeing on the ground, and then what they intend to do about it in the future, before any of that information actually makes it into economic information. Also, we have supply and demand modeling. It's kind of along the lines of the stock to flow model, which was made by Plan B. However, we know the stock to flow model has been falsified since the time of recording. So it's in principle a good example of looking into the future and seeing how something should behave later on. But of course, this is not a promotion of that particular methodology itself. It's just an example of leading information, something that tells you what will or will probably happen into the future. An easy example of coincident information is technical analysis. So technical analysis is, by definition, coincident. It classifies past information and gives us an indication as to what is happening right now. However, it contains no information of the future. And this is a fact. So I would challenge anybody to fight me on this one. But yes, technical analysis is very much a coincident indicator. Lagging indicators, of course, we've come full circle now, and by far and away, the best lagging indicator is the news. The news is like looking into the rear vision of your car as you're driving down the highway. You can see where you've been, but you have no idea where you're going. So we have to understand that news does not give probabilistic predictions. It does not give mean reversions or trend following signals. By definition, news is being given to you by the 99% of everybody who doesn't know what's going on in the market. These are people who do not have any money and who do not have techniques of their own. People who are too busy making money don't give news to anybody. It's just the nature of the game, right? You're not going to find somebody who's constantly giving you news who actually is profitable, because a person who's obsessed with the news is obsessed with the past. A person who is profitable is obsessed with what's currently happening and what will happen in the future. So when you're looking at news, you're seeing that all of these different price moves are being assigned reasons. The problem is that this trains your mind to think that all price moves are meant to be assigned reasons. Price goes up, price goes down. You see it moving around a lot and you go, what happened? What happened? Keep asking, what happened? Nothing matters and nothing happened. The market is just flows based and it's just moving on the people who are transacting in there. It's not worth your time to keep asking why, because that will just lead you down the path of the news. Of course, asking why is important, but it needs to be within the right context. You need to be looking at coincident and leading data and asking why, not looking at lagging data and asking why. Even if you can find the 1% of usable information from the news that's actually from very high quality sources, it's very likely that that information is being front run as well, and that you won't be able to express that view into the market because so many other people are actually looking at that information as well. So within this context, I believe that looking at data means that you will have the highest chance of success rather than looking at what other people's interpretations of the markets are, because you're relying on people to think and rationalize and spend their time working up these reasons, which of course are inherently backwards looking. Really, the data, the modeling, the forward-looking information is going to be the information that you want. A great example of all of this kind of put together is to think about the FTX fraud drama. The price is collapsing. Bitcoin price goes down 25% in 2 days, and it's an absolute panic. Everyone's freaking out. Everyone's losing money. And you log on the second day and notice that all of the bad shit has happened, and you're like, oh no, holy shit, what happened to FTX? I have to short the market. I have to short now. You're on the third, fourth, fifth day, and the news keeps coming out. And they're like, oh my God, FTX is fucked. FTX, everything bad is happening with FTX. It's really, really bad, guys. Fifth, sixth, seventh day, everything's really bad. And you're like shorting the market, shorting. But you're already too late. All the information that was necessary to short the market at the right time would have been exchange inflow and outflow data on using on-chain analysis. So this way you would have seen people withdrawing their funds from the exchange. You would have seen the decline in their reserves, and you would have been saying to yourself, well, this is a bank run, and bank runs usually end in collapse because they're a self-fulfilling prophecy. And you would have been able to get your capital out of FTX before any of the collapses had ever happened. This is leading information. This is information which tells you what is going to happen. And then there you are, looking at the news, getting freaked out by this constant flow of negativity and going, I need to short the market. It's already happened. It's done. There's no more useful information in the market for you to use. It's a great example of how news is not useful at all. So, in summary, leading information tells you what will happen. Coincident information tells you what is happening. Lagging information tells you what has happened. And be aware of these three. All right, with that being said, thank you very much, guys, and I'll see you in the next one. Welcome to the investing lecture on altcoin dangers. This is going to be a wake-up call to counteract the siren's call of altcoins. Everybody thinks they're an easy ticket to big money, but we're about to dive into some details here so that you know precisely what you're dealing with. So incentives are a very powerful thing. Just like a rat that needs to chew through a wall to get to food that's lying on the other side, humans can be incredibly creative when they need to achieve a certain outcome. It doesn't matter whether it's at the detriment to somebody else, or whether it causes harm, or whether there is some sort of concealed way that they need to get to their goals. People, as long as there's incentives, like the breadcrumbs, they'll eventually find their way to their reward when they try hard enough. So ask yourselves, what is your incentive in the market? Well, you feel like you want to make the most money possible, right? So you go onto a website like CoinGecko, for example, and you can sort the performance column, like the 7-day performance column of literally every altcoin in existence. And you can scroll up to the top of the list and you can say, oh my God, well, look, some random token managed to pump 100,000% in the last week. That could be me. I didn't catch this one, but maybe I could catch the next one. So I need to hold a whole bag of altcoins just in case it's me. Putting aside the fact that this is a massive gambling mindset and you should not be applying this whatsoever, but the function of these altcoins is actually not to serve you at all. It couldn't be further from the truth. The main delusion here, obviously, like I mentioned, is that people think that the altcoins serve to make them money, when they forget that it's actually the people who designed the tokens in the first place. It's actually designed to make them wealthy. The people who created them wanted to get wealthy, which is why they existed in the first place. But I bet you conveniently forgot about that, didn't you? Out of sight, out of mind. If you think that for some reason that these people created these tokens out of the goodness of their heart to create wealth for you, you're fucking delusional. Remember, the incentives were always so that they made the most money possible, and I'll show you why. If you look at this chart that I've displayed on the screen here, you can see this research from Masari that actually gives you an indication of the proportion of the allocations for the different cryptocurrencies that are held by insiders. Also with the public sale, the community allocations, and the foundations and more. But ultimately, it's the insiders. They're the ones that we're looking at right now. So when you see the pink or the salmon color on your screen, or orange, depending on what your color blindness level is, you can see that there's a varying degree of insider interest in different token projects. Now, this is directly related to the incentives that different tokens have to mislead people and to generate wealth for themselves. You can see a token like EOS, for example, which only has a 10% insider stake. We know for a fact that EOS doesn't have much public promotion. It kind of disappears, like nobody's really looking after it. It's only a very small percentage. But when you have something like Blockstack or Internet Computer or Flow or Nia or CeeLo or Binance or Solana or Avalanche, these tokens are tokens that are massively held by insiders. These are the tokens that have all of the promotional activities stacked against you. But I'm getting ahead of myself, so we'll just slow down for a second. The point that I was trying to get at here is that a lot of insider people are holding these tokens and not the overall market. So they have an outsized incentive to do certain things that generate wealth for themselves rather than generate wealth for other people. Now, this is human nature. Obviously, everybody is somewhat self-interested. But the good news is this is how it's meant to be. Capitalism actually captures this effect and it aligns the selfish interests of individuals with the benefit of society. New goods and services get created so that they can sell them to the open market when people pay for them. Wealth is created for the inventors and the entire economy benefits as a result. Now, this is good, and it always remains good for the overall economy and society, provided the incentive structures are still in alignment, and that you have the incentives for things like this aligned with not only the creation of these technologies and these services, but also their maintenance and continued development. But we find out that often that's not the case. So here's a quick story time to give you a bit of context behind what's actually going on here. Google is a fantastic example of this. Many years ago, Google unofficially adopted what is known as the launch, promo, and abandon cycle. This really explains why they went through a period of their history several years ago where they had new chat apps, new teamwork applications, new social medias, new tools coming out almost every single week. Because everybody that was working for the company actually had their incentive structures aligned with launches and not with the maintenance of their core money-making systems. Google could have been a much larger company if they had their incentive structures aligned correctly. Alas, this is not the case. However, you can actually go to a website called killedbygoogle.com and find 275 instances of projects and ideas that were launched by Google and then subsequently abandoned. The reason being, like I have mentioned previously, is because the incentive structure was always aligned with the selfish desires of the individuals who were in charge of those projects. So they would launch, they would promote, they would make it look amazing, so then they could get their own promotions, their own bonuses. And of course, because there was no incentive to maintain them or provide any extra value for the people that were using these services, they were then destroyed or cancelled or whatever it was. And this is really the same type of analogy that we have for the cryptocurrency market. So when it comes to the cryptocurrency market and how their incentive structures are aligned, you can see that it's very, very similar to the way that Google managed their projects, the launch, promo, and abandon cycle. And top secret trick right here, Alpha Drop, they're all the same people. They're all the same coders from Silicon Valley. They're all the same people who know the tech, they know how to launch, they know how to gather teams together. all of these people with their specialty expertise, all the blockchain designers, they're all from these same companies. So they're very familiar with these processes and they know precisely how to get what they want. Now, the most dangerous part of all of this process, because it wouldn't be really that bad, except for this one dimension of this whole process, which is the promotion part of the process. The problem here is that it's not good enough to just launch. They also need to promote as well. Now, this is where things start to fall apart for the retail traders. So, you have the promotions start to come out and they tell you that it's the best thing since sliced bread. They brainwash everybody in the market to thinking that it's their secret trick, that this token project is going to change the world. It's going to moon harder than anything else you've seen before. It'll make instant millionaires from everybody that touches the project. Of course they'll tell you this, because this is where their incentives are aligned. They will post their logo everywhere. They will bribe influencers. They will pay politicians off. They'll hire celebrities. They'll slap TV ads. They will spend almost an unlimited amount of money in order to get your attention so that they can dump on your ass. Now, this is a well-known fact in the financial markets. Whenever you have a new corporation launch or a new token launch, essentially the function of this entire project or this entire operation is to actually generate what's called exit liquidity. This is where individuals like yourself or myself, if I was subject to brainwashing like this, believe the marketing that they push to you, either through influencers who are kind of like guerrilla marketing or through direct influencers, which is familiarization with the logos and the advertising and everything. And you are then compelled to purchase these tokens and generate the buying pressure that actually sustains the price to the degree that when they are selling in the background, because their only concern, they bought these tokens as insiders for like 1 cent, and you're buying it from them at like 100, 200, 300x multiple, like $1, $2, $3, or whatever it is. I'm just making up examples, but they're using you as exit liquidity so that they can get out of their positions that they've spent, a year or two in because they were developing it behind the scenes. And now you're coming along and digging up the marketing and, appreciating it and being like, oh, this is amazing. And then they just dump on your ass and you're the one left holding the bag in the end. The point here is that you think that they're angels. You think that the marketing's fantastic. You think the project is virtuous. And then because of this marketing, you're psychologically bound to the project. You think that it's worth something. You think that maybe the community is correct because all of the deluded people kind of form groups together. And this is really bag holding personified to the highest degree, because as it starts to fall, you're in denial and you don't believe that it could possibly go down because the marketing was so amazing, right? It was meant to change the world. However, you're still forgetting the fundamental principle that the token's existence was always to serve the insiders and it was never to serve you in the first place. So this is where the cognitive dissonance is kind of preventing you from selling your bags even when you start to see it go down. The next major problem when it comes to altcoins, and especially bag holding, is also the excessive time-based exposure phenomenon, or this is really an application of FOMO to the highest degree. So if you have all of this marketing, or for example, just anecdotally experienced events where you're sitting there in the market and you see suddenly the price of a token that you've been watching go up by like 100x and everybody's freaking out over it, and you're like, oh my God, I didn't know that one was coming. And I hold like a whole bunch of other shit as well. So I don't know when they're going to go up as well. So I have to hold all of them. But this is wrong as well. This is a faulty mindset, because you would actually be surprised at how little time you actually need to hold altcoins in the total sum of your lifetime exposure to actually gain the benefits of altcoin pumps. And I'll show you that in the chart that follows. So if you look at the chart that I've put on the screen right now, what you'll see is the last cryptocurrency bull run that happened over 2020, 2021. And you can see that towards the end of the Bitcoin bull market, when hype was at its highest, there was only really a 50-day window, or maybe slightly wider, depending on how you take your measurement, where altcoins were really pumping, where random shit was really pumping. And that was really at the tail end. So you can see there that a lot of crazy market activity was happening, but it was only at the very end. And you could have been in Bitcoin that whole way up and just simply rotated into altcoins, quadruple million timed your profit, and you would have never needed to hold your altcoins for that entire time anyway. And if we go even further out, if you zoom out and look at those 50 days over the course of that entire bull run, if you take it from the cycle bottom, those 50 days is only equivalent to 5% of the entire time that you could have been exposed to the market during that time. 5%. So ask yourself, is it really worth bag holding your altcoins for 100% of the time, especially when they go down faster than Bitcoin in a bear market, and they sustain a flat level of performance for longer during a bull market, and only at the very last second they come up? Is it really worthwhile holding them for that long? Is it really worthwhile bag holding and having excessive time-based exposure? FOMO, oh no, I don't know if it's ever going to pump. Meanwhile, your entire net worth is being degraded into oblivion. Not really. No, that's a bad way of approaching it. Altcoins and random projects are really only good at the tail end of a crypto bull market. Actually, it's more useful as a signal. So when you see altcoins starting to moon, that's generally an indication that you're starting to get towards the end of the bull market. So insider trick right there. Now, I've touched on qualitative analysis and how we generally don't use it. And the whole discussion comes up on how do we select good tokens? How do we know what's good and what isn't? Generally, we're approaching this from a quantitative standpoint, and that is the main methodology that I use to approach the cryptocurrency market because it's very objective, it can be learned quickly. We've already covered all this stuff. However, there will be a very short course on qualitative token selection given in the investing masterclass. So stick around for that afterwards, and I'll take you through a couple of bits and pieces. It will not be exhaustive, however, it'll just give you a little bit, just enough so that you can make some good decisions for yourself, just based off my experience. So in summary, altcoins and tokens are really created so that insiders can dump on their followers and cash out so that they can make the most money possible. They're not designed for altruistic purposes. They're not designed to serve you. They have no desire to help you as an individual. They're very selfish, and that's okay because that is the design of capitalism. That's how the market should be. Understanding this is really the magic key to having your mind unlocked so that you can realize what's kind of a player versus player market looks like. Token demand and hype is manufactured to increase the amount of demand for the tokens so that they can dump on you. And generally, one of the main memes that they use in order to force you to do this psychologically is the hodl meme. And you'll see this a lot. So never hodl. Hodling is a psyop designed by the altcoin market. It's really been adopted from the Bitcoin market as well to absolutely fuck up the most amount of retail traders possible. So don't be married to your bags. Don't become obsessed with them. Don't feel anything about them. Don't like any projects. Don't hold forever. Be very objective, be skeptical, and stay alive. It's also a good idea to remind yourself that most token projects are abandoned by the people that created them as soon as they've served their purpose. Again, this feeds back into the FOMO and the excessive time-based exposure principle. Don't go bag holding into the next bull market thinking that maybe if you hold through a whole cycle, it'll somehow benefit you, because it won't. And final point is to remember that alts pump at the tail end of bull markets most of the time, which means that you should always be holding your majors like Bitcoin and Ethereum through the majority of the bull market and then swapping into altcoins at the very end, catching a few pumps and then getting the fuck out and then never coming back to them, because remembering that they're not there to serve you. So guys, what I've covered here is all the altcoin dangers, the incentives behind the different teams and why you shouldn't be trusting them. And hopefully after you've learned all of this, you'll be better prepared for approaching the cryptocurrency market and making good selections about your holdings. I'll see you in the next one.
Hello, and welcome to Adam's Swing Trading Masterclass. Today is unit number 4, which is the long-term core component of the masterclass, where we look at the stock-to-flow ratio. Disclaimer: Any views or opinions in this course are strictly my own. I'm not a financial advisor, and this is not financial advice. Tactics, strategies, philosophies, and fundamental principles presented here are mutually exclusive with material presented by the other professors. This is because my methods target different goals using different data. So, first up, macro view and price signal. To perform any type of analysis in a correlated cryptocurrency market, we must start at the highest level. I believe that begins with the stock to flow model. A solid understanding of future probabilities allows us to formulate rational expectations which inform things like our timing and position sizing. This analysis is what I call the signal and is the foundation of the enhanced long-term philosophy used in my swing trading. Extracting signal from Bitcoin data is the work done behind the scenes to gain an understanding of what price probabilities we are faced with moving forwards. So this slide here is extracted from unit number 1. You can see that what we're going to be looking at today is based on the fundamental laws of economics and a mixture of that and on-chain data. If you're thinking back to that unit 1 lecture, we're going to be trying to move down this list here in sequence and then go back to the beginning again to do the systemization at the very end of the masterclass so we can tie everything together. So the learning objectives today, what is the stock to flow ratio? Stock to flow model as a price estimator and the stock to flow criticisms. So what is the stock to flow? Quantifying economic scarcity. Traditional long-term valuation. For traditional financial assets, such as stocks and bonds, it has been fairly easy to approximate a fair price for the asset as a function of its expected future cash flows. Because Bitcoin doesn't generate any cash flows, we have to find another method of modeling its value. I'm just going to give you a quick primer here in economic supply and demand, which will give you a little bit of an idea of what we might be looking at today. This isn't directly applicable to what we're looking at, but it'll get your mind in the right space. So if you have never seen a supply and demand model before in economics, this is pretty much what it looks like. We have a demand curve and we have a supply curve. S0, D0, and we have price and quantity here on the two axes. What happens is if we have a sudden reduction in supply, the supply curve moves to the left. What this does is it moves the equilibrium market clearing price from point 0 to point 1, which means that if the demand curve doesn't change and there's no change in the wealth or the ability of people to purchase more, they have to purchase less if there's less supply. Not only that, but the price also rises. So you can see here that changes in supply dynamics can affect the market price and the quantity. This can work the other way around, where you have an increase in supply and that lowers the price as well. And you can have shifts in demand and supply all over the place. But essentially what we're looking at is the equilibrium. And the equilibrium moves around and shows us where the market will appropriately price that commodity or asset. So gold is expensive because it's scarce and in demand. But dirt is worthless because it's abundant and useless. So you may be asking, this all makes sense. But silver is also scarce. So why is the price of gold always higher? This can be explained with a supply and demand chart, sure, but it would only give us the instantaneous market price of the asset and would be mostly useless at forecasting future value. Thankfully, we can go one level deeper and model its approximate market value in advance using supply data. You can see how this would be useful for estimating the market value of an asset with no cash flows, such as Bitcoin. This is an economic principle relating to the total existing stock of an asset relative to the supply rate of new units flowing into the market. This relationship can be thought of as the total stock relative to the newly created flows, or the stock to flow ratio. So, just again, stock is the size of the existing stockpiles of reserves, and flow is the new yearly production. And this, we're going to do an example here. When this model was originally applied to Bitcoin in 2019, gold had a stock to flow ratio of 62, meaning it takes 62 years at the current production rate to get the current gold stock. Silver is the second highest with a stock to flow ratio of 22. This high stock to flow ratio makes them monetary goods. Keep in mind, it is very difficult to have a commodity with a high stock to flow ratio because if anyone hoards the asset, it becomes more scarce. It goes up in price. Then production increases to take advantage of the higher prices, increasing the flow and bringing the price back down again. This is what happens to platinum and palladium. You can see here that a very low stock to flow ratios because the flow it only takes 1 year. One year can literally see here of flow to match the total stock. So you can see the market is very reactive to to the commodity. Bitcoin. If you've gone through the start here materials, then you'll already know Bitcoin's supply rate cannot be accelerated. Therefore, there cannot be an increase in production in response to investors hoarding the asset. With Bitcoin, a shortage of the asset usually results in higher prices, often dramatically so. Furthermore, the supply rate is predetermined for at least the next 100 years, meaning that while we cannot predict the future demand function for Bitcoin, we can know the supply function with certainty. And this is what it looks like. In this one chart here, we essentially have the Bitcoin stock, which is a cumulative measurement. We can see here it goes up very fast and then flattens off into the future. And then we also have the flow, which is the inflation rate, newly minted Bitcoin. And it reduces over time. You can see here it gets cut in half in these different eras. This is approximately in the 4-year halving cycles. And yeah, we're to the best of my knowledge, we're in the 6.25 block reward era right now. And so yeah, in this one chart here, you've got the stock and the flow. So we can make a function out of that and essentially determine the stock to flow. Now you can see here within each halving era, it's not exactly smooth. We have a bit of variability in the inflation rate due to hash rate being added and taken away from the network, and the difficulty adjustment constantly oscillating to try and manage the inflation rate to get it as close to its average as possible. So it's never going to be perfectly flat because the Bitcoin network itself can't adjust that fast, and the hash rate's constantly jumping in and out. But you can see approximately it sits, at its predetermined rate. It just moves around a little bit. So when we go to this chart here, which is the pretty much the foundational chart of the stock to flow ratio, it's kind of explains why there's variability in the stock to flow ratio, when taking into consideration that the inflation rate has a little bit of noise in it. So it will vibrate from side to side along this axis down here. And then the Bitcoin price itself, as the price of Bitcoin and the market cap itself moves around, it will oscillate up and down on this axis as well. The most interesting thing is when you actually look at the stock to flow ratio for any one particular month, and you look at the market value for any particular month, and you start to plot those together as a relationship. All these dots. And what happens is if you put a regression through these dots, you find it has a very strong linear relationship. What's even more interesting is that once plotted, you look at gold and silver up here, they sit very close to that linear relationship on that line as well, which at least initially suggests to us that not only does Bitcoin have a very strong relationship for its market price to its stock to flow ratio, but so does gold and silver. Great signs there. And so this is one of the foundational charts for the stock to flow ratio. I won't go through all the advanced maths to try and figure it out again to explain it to you guys. You can do that in your own time if you're interested. We'll go just one level deeper here. And this was the stock to flow cross asset model, where algorithmic clustering was brought in to essentially group the Bitcoin stock to flow ratios in each halving era. And you can see the green dot up here is the approximation of the stock to flow ratio to the market cap value for this era that we're currently in, placed on this linear relationship. And in this one as well, which was done a year or so later by 100 Trillion Plan B, you can see that silver, gold, real estate, and diamonds also have a very close linear relationship, which is just all super fascinating. And all the little red dots in the back here, you can see gold yearly values and the gold cluster very tightly grouped over here, which is a fantastic example of that relationship between the gold market value and the stock to flow of gold being very tightly correlated. So yeah, if we can look and we can say, well, using the inflation values, using the stock and the flow, we can essentially get a stock to flow ratio here, and we can say, okay, if we know what it is and we have the linear relationship, then what is the market value? We go over to the side here and we say, well, if the market value is such and such, and we know exactly how many Bitcoins there are in circulation, then logically we can derive the estimated price, which is the next thing that we're going to be looking at. So stock to flow as a price estimator. This was the original stock to flow ratio plotted as like literally a price chart where we have, you can see here the purple line in the background. We would have the halving events where the value of the stock to flow would jump up quite quickly, and the variability is representing the hash rate moving around. So then we have big jumps, and the price is kind of attracted to that. And you can see that's the idea behind it anyway, that every time we have a halving, we have a supply shock that's reflected in this stock to flow ratio, which in turn drives the price up in order to sterilize that imbalance between supply and demand and have that scarcity reflected in the price of the asset. You can see over here that we're currently just below the predicted stock to flow ratio for the original model, which is the most conservative one out of all the different models. There's a couple, but there's only really two major ones that we'll be looking at. And you can see here, this is the second one, the cross asset model. So whereas the first one has an equilibrium price of about $100,000 per Bitcoin, the cross asset model has a equilibrium price of about $280,000 to $300,000 per Bitcoin. And of course, one of the interesting historical features of the price as well is that it seems to overshoot the stock to flow ratio in each era. Now, whether or not it'll actually get to that or go past it, that's subject for debate. You can see here that we might have diminishing returns for each era. It goes far above the stock to flow over here. It goes quite far above over here, but not very far above here, at least with the cross asset model. With the original one, the relationship's a little more better. A little more tight. We have an overshoot here, an overshoot here, a decent overshoot here. We might just hit the line. We might only see Bitcoin to $100,000 or $200,000 at its absolute peak. But yeah, it's a good way of approximating what the supply and demand dynamics of Bitcoin look like over the long term, because we can't know the demand unless we are like gods and we can look into the psychology of the market and know what every single participant is doing. But using the supply dynamics, which are known, gives us a great base to work from to try and figure out where things are moving. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to think about how we can apply this to trading. So obviously, if you remember this from one of my earlier videos, what we're trying to do is we're trying to find positions in the Bitcoin price where we have the absolute most upside potential available to us. This will enable us to take on more risk, or maybe change our position sizing to better reflect a high probability opportunity that can also make a high magnitude gains. So, for example, these two squares down here are places where I would be looking to incorporate the stock to flow model to see whether or not we have an outsized opportunity to make money. Over a long enough period of time, this is kind of what we're looking for. We're looking for these spots here. Thankfully, using the stock to flow model, we have actually a pretty good model of looking at that. So if we actually take the price of Bitcoin and plot it against our expectations of the stock to flow, we can get a stock to flow multiple like this. It's like an oscillator that moves around zero, which is the predicted Bitcoin price. And we can see areas where the Bitcoin price is far higher than predicted and also far lower than predicted. And this can give us good examples of places that we should be paying attention. Here, I've done my best to line up the charts so that you guys can see where exactly I'd be looking for opportunities to add large sizes to my positions, especially if I was swing trading to have my conviction very high. You can see here that I've got the green lines linked into locations where the price has declined below the stock to flow model equilibrium line. And yeah, the historical hit rate is being quite good, obviously. There are some criticisms, though. Criticisms that this model is overfit and that it's just a sheer coincidence. So we'll have a quick look at that. Future projections. Because the inflation rate of Bitcoin is destined to hit zero eventually, with a stock to flow ratio of infinity, the stock to flow ratio therefore predicts a final price of infinity. Clearly, this is not correct. Logically, at some point, there must be diminishing returns to scale. Whether this happens slowly over time or suddenly at some point in the future is unknown. We have to take this into consideration, that there may be diminishing returns, significance, and co-integration. There have been many mathematicians who have run different analysis on the different variations of the stock to flow model to find that there is no co-integration between stock to flow and price. This essentially means the stock to flow model cannot be disproven and may be coincidental. As a result, it falls outside the verifiable scope of the scientific method. And as we all know, the scientific method, the one of the core principles of that is that for a theory to be taken as law, it must be able to be disproven. Failure to do that means that you cannot take a model seriously. However, these are a few comments from one of the mathematicians, statisticians that did most of the work on proving and disproving the stock to flow model. Even if stock to flow ends up being garbage or another rainbow chart, there are plenty of other reasons Bitcoin will continue to outperform every other asset. There is no stock to flow, there is no model, there is only rocket fuel. The model may be correct in principle, but it can never be proven. Now, if you're thinking about all this and you're thinking, well, this sounds pretty grim, Adam, and I'm not sure if I can trust it anymore. The thing is about the stock to flow model is that it's a tool. It's a tool in our tool belt, but it does a great job of conceptually explaining why the Bitcoin price does what it does. And it takes into account all the variables that you would logically think would make the price react. It takes into consideration the constriction of supply. It takes into consideration the total available supply of Bitcoin. There are more advanced models that take into account lost coins and coins that are basically, locked in wallets forever that can't be recovered. And those models are pretty interesting to look at as well. But yeah, if it's just another tool in our tool belt. Essentially, what we're going to be doing over the course of this swing trading masterclass is collecting as many different models as possible. So even if one breaks, then we'll be able to revert to another one. I still believe wholeheartedly that this model is actually very useful. Conceptually, I think it makes perfect sense. And yeah, I know that the diminishing returns will absolutely come into it over time. Looking at the stock to flow cross asset model and how much higher it is than the original model, I'd say it's probably a bit too optimistic. Let's be honest. We might enter a phase of the Bitcoin maturity where we just have extended market cycles that just go a lot flatter out into the future like this instead of having huge run-ups. And as a result, most of the volatility may move down into small caps. But that's something that we can look at into the future. Essentially, we're just looking at this and saying to ourselves, how can we use this as a good tool? You can see recently, we actually had a huge amount of deflection away from where the stock to flow predicted price should be, which to me screams great buying opportunity. Whether or not it's perfectly accurate, I think that it makes a lot of sense. With that being said, prepare for unit number 5, where we keep expanding our price model toolkit. If you have any questions, please jump into the crypto general chat or crypto questions and hit me with the @ tag. Thank you very much, guys. Talk to you soon. Now, cross-asset analysis. We're going to be spending a bit of time on this one, and you're going to see a worked example at the end. So this is essentially what I use to do most of the research. Have a correlation table looking at the different assets that we have and the correlations over 15, 30, 90, and 120 day periods. The 1 year rolling correlation high and low table, that's probably not really useful. I don't use it personally, but the price correlation chart down here, it can be a little bit useful. You can see where the trends in the assets are coming from. Just over the 30-day period, you can see this one, for example, the stock market is currently quite highly correlated to Bitcoin, and gold is quite highly inversely correlated. And generally, if I'm looking at these correlation tables, I'm putting a lot of emphasis on correlations closer to the present. This is going to give me a little more signal, a little more idea of where the correlations are shifting. Potentially paying attention to how they change on a day-to-day basis is also very important. But it depends on just how much data you can handle in your brain at any one particular point. What I actually do is I put these all into my own table, and then I figure out the averages of all the different assets. So that helps me out a little bit in my own personal research. So what I do is I keep those in mind, and I say to myself, well, which one's looking the highest correlation? Highest correlation, positive or negative? Negative can be useful too, just as useful as positive correlation. And say, well, the stock market is looking very positively correlated at the moment, so I'm going to use that one, and I'll keep that in my mind. So what I'll do is I'll go to the charts and I'll look at, say, small caps or large caps, and say, well, what do I think the bias is for these? And if they're ranging, I might say to myself, well, if it's positively correlated and it looks like it's at the top of the range, it might just go down. And if it's correlated to Bitcoin, that means Bitcoin will go down too. Obviously, small caps are looking a little bit easier than the large caps. I mean, large caps could just continue drifting up higher like that, and that would cause Bitcoin to go up as well. So whether it goes up or down, that one's a little less certain. This one seemed a little more certain to me because of the risk ranges, which I'll go into. But also, there's a classic inverse correlation to Bitcoin as well, which is that when the US dollar becomes stronger, Bitcoin becomes weaker. I was considering that if the stock market was to fall, we might see something like this towards the top of the risk range, which would probably indicate that Bitcoin would fall as well if the correlation, the historical correlation, was to maintain. But here's the caveat. Did you notice how the US dollar correlation wasn't very strong across any of these time horizons here? We didn't have any correlations that were above or below 0.5. So while it was positive, you can see here 0.2 and 0.3, it wasn't exceptionally strong. So it was possible that that could have had some effect, but definitely not as much as effect as the stock market. So moving onwards, this gave me a bit of a bias for where Bitcoin might be going, especially due to the run-up that we had. Generally, my ethos is performance attracts leverage and leverage attracts liquidations. So for a sustainable rally, I suspected leading up to this point that because my bias for the stock market was negative, or at least less bullish than I had been previously, that we might see a sustained decline in both stocks and Bitcoin. And it may look something like this, also to compensate for this recent rally that we had. So what I'm going to do now, and that's obviously in the context of these risk ranges as well. So what we're going to do now is we're actually going to go over to the charts, and we're going to look at how this actually played out, and we're going to look at how I would manage my correlations in the current moment. So in practice, I'm going to show a worked example. The current correlation table, as you can see, is different to the one in the slide because it was made about last week sometime. So what I did is I actually took these correlations and I pumped them into my own correlation table, and yeah, basically determined the average. This is the way I like to do it personally. This isn't absolutely necessary. If you just wanted to, you could probably just run the 15-day correlations and just look at those on your chart if you really wanted to. And maybe 30 days and not worry about the 90 and 120 days. But me personally, because I just love the more data the better. I just took the average of all the different correlations for each of these assets, and yeah, that kind of guides my decision making then. So at the moment, we have a strong correlation to the stock market and a strong negative correlation to gold. Interesting one. So we're going to keep those in mind as we move forwards. So looking at Bitcoin and where I had the charts set up with the squiggle, you can kind of see that my guess was kind of right. It definitely wasn't perfectly accurate. And I would say that my suspicions of this drop are probably no longer accurate. I mean, we might see some sort of a liquidation down here, but it would have to be exceptionally fast. If I'm doing this in real time now, what I'll do is I'll move this over to the side. And I would say my new bias would probably be something ridiculous like that. Just a quick wick and then a pump. But This isn't about my predictions for Bitcoin necessarily. This is about how we're doing correlations. So stock market and gold, if we're looking at the stock market, you can see that it didn't go down very much at all, and it's shot straight back up again. Actually haven't updated these ranges since last week. You can see small caps as well. My prediction there was absolutely wrong, which is fine because I wasn't trading small caps. I was just trying to deduce what their correlations might mean for Bitcoin. And I do most of the directional betting using these risk ranges, which I'll expand on in a moment. Gold is probably the most interesting one because if you remember from our table, stock market is very highly correlated positive, but we also have the gold, which is negative currently over pretty much all horizons except for 15 days. So if we're looking at this one right now and gold is looking quite expensive, then that means that there's a probability that it might come down to the bottom of this range again, which would indicate that there's a potential pump in Bitcoin that could come up. So we might see something like this. And as that comes down, that causes Bitcoin to rise because the two are inversely correlated. So yeah, something like that would probably be all right. And yeah, so essentially every single day, or as often as I can, I redo these risk ranges so that I have an approximation of what the potential for that asset to do is. I do this with the dollar as well. You can see my bet on the dollar was wrong. Not that I was betting on it; it was just an assumption, kind of figuring out what might happen if the stock market was to fall. And for example, if we had something like this, let's just do, oh, excuse me. Let's just do an example and say that currently we were in a regime where the dollar was very positively correlated. No, let's say it's inversely correlated to Bitcoin because that's the classic example. And it was something like this, where we had the dollar at the very bottom of its risk range and we had a lot of airspace going up. Then I would be suspicious, very, very suspicious of any rally in Bitcoin if this wasn't going to drop any further. If Bitcoin started to rise and this didn't budge and we had a very strong negative correlation at the time, I'd be like, oh, well, if this goes up like this, which it might, because, it could be following this kind of pattern here where it's ranging around, then we would be very, very suspicious of Bitcoin and might say to ourselves, well, we might expect something like this then. Because, like I mentioned, the dollar and Bitcoin move in opposite directions, generally speaking. That's the classic correlation. Obviously, what we're trying to do is we're trying to compare this against the correlations that we have to say whether or not it's strong at the moment. You can see that there's virtually no correlation here to the dollar itself. So this is a correlation we wouldn't necessarily need to worry about. So yeah, this is how I perform my correlation analysis. This actually forms quite a large part of my analysis at the moment with my swing trading when it comes to shorter term stuff. So you might be asking, well, where do I get these ranges from? Because these ranges are the only tool that I use when it comes to charting. I use nothing else. You'll see that when I go to stocks, when I go to small caps, when I go to VIX, when I go to bonds, these lines are the only lines on my chart because at the end of the day, they're the only tools that provide any signal. You can find these tools at myfractalrange.com, or you can get them from Hedgeye. Hedgeye provides these ranges in their CryptoQuant email for Bitcoin and for Ethereum. If you want to have multi-asset stuff, you need to purchase their risk range signals as well. But if you want them for free, they're a little bit lower quality. You can go to myfractalrange.com. And yeah, So you can basically do this analysis on your own, just using these correlation tables. Oh yeah, that's right. I was going to show you how to do correlations as well. If you want to know how to determine correlations, for yourself, so that you can do this, all you need to do is go to the indicators section, type in correlation. You'll get the correlation coefficient, and it's the built-in one. And the asset that you'll want is BTC USD. Any one will do. Apply that bad boy. And then when you go to, say, stocks, and you adjust this for 15 days, 0.56, 0.57. You can see they're basically the same. USD, negative 0.15, negative 0.8. They're quite close. Close enough that you'll be able to get a decent amount of signal out of it. And you can go ahead and just do that for all the different assets that mean something, which is essentially this list here. You can go down through the assets and have the different time horizons and populate this entire chart yourself using free tools. Like I said as well, the MyFractal Range website, they provide free risk ranges, so you can use those if you want. Like I said, I use the Hedgeye ones, so let's have a look. Portfolio. Nope, it's not there. All right. So, but yeah, you can use the Hedgeye ones if you want. You can use the free ones if you want. It's up to you. But yeah. Cross asset macro analysis forms a large part of my analysis personally, and yeah, I like to use that in combination with all my other indicators. So with that all being said, please prepare for unit number 7, where we aggregate the data from previous units into a practical system. If you have any questions or thoughts or anything, please jump into the crypto general chat with or crypto questions and hit me with the @tag. Now, I want you guys to just be all right with this, because towards the end of the masterclass, we're going to be going through this multiple times again, and I'm going to be doing complete analysis, like from front to back, current market updates, and all that type of shit. I just wanted to get this masterclass kind of fleshed out first, so that you guys have an idea, your minds are prepped for what I'll be throwing at you when we get a little more complicated when I do the full market analysis. Basically, what I want to do is get you guys to the point where when I do my full market analysis at the very end, and I go from front to back and I use my full system, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about, because my my method is I would say is quite complex, like incredibly complex, but the point is that with any of the data, or even if you know like maybe half of what I know, you'd still be able to make tons of money. So yeah, just stick with it. It's I promise when we get to the end, it's probably not going to be as complicated as you think it's going to be. It's still going to be quite complex, but you're not going to need to memorize too much. We're going to be making spreadsheets and shit and systems so that you won't need to think too hard at the very end. Anyway, that being said, thank you very much, guys. I'll talk to you soon. Hello, welcome to Adam's Swing Trading Masterclass, Unit 2. We're going to be looking at market behavior today, Bitcoin and alts together. Disclaimer, any views or opinions in this course are strictly my own. I'm not a financial advisor, this is not financial advice. Tactics, strategies, philosophies, and fundamental principles here are mutually exclusive with material presented by the other professors. This is because my methods target different goals to theirs using different data. The learning objectives for today are going to be looking at Bitcoin. We're going to be doing a bit of a deeper dive now, looking into the nature of the beast. It's going to be a bit more complicated than Unit 1, but we'll take you through it step by step. Learning objective 2, Bitcoin signal. We're going to be extending some analysis from Unit 1 and looking at some deeper principles here, preparing you for further lectures where we go into a super deep dive onto all the different indicators and data sets I use. And number 3, the altcoin market cycle. First up, I'll have a look at Bitcoin. First of all, there's no conjecture on the subject of Bitcoin's volatility or extreme historical performance. Bitcoin is the yardstick that all cryptocurrency investment performance is measured against. Bitcoin's volatility is extreme. With timing, an investor could have caught 27,000, 6,000, 1,000, and 8,000% rallies for a cumulative 1,295,999 blah, blah, percent. Yes, you read that correctly. I've done the maths myself. Avoiding the drawdowns and selling at the peaks would have grossed an investor over 1,000,000,000% over the last 10 years. Of course, that would take a little bit of skill. The volatility of Bitcoins persistently exceeds that of any other major asset class: gold, S&P 500 stocks, currencies, or anything. Even oil for the most part. Volatility is the lifeblood of opportunity. This is why Bitcoin acts as a giant magnet for the attention of enterprising individuals thirsty to exploit those opportunities. This is a good example of pretty much the highest performing second asset over the over a time frame you're trying to force. This here is ticker code TQQQ, which is the triple leveraged Nasdaq. The Nasdaq stock market index over the last decade really has been the highest performing stock market index in the world, and this is the triple leveraged version of it down here in the orange. You can see that it's only returned a measly 7,500% over the last few years. Whereas even when we're fitting it to try and make the stock index as high performing as possible, Bitcoin still beats it with a 2,000,000% return. So obviously Bitcoin is the daddy of all returns. Even this one, for example, where we start at the very beginning of this data series, you can see that it opened with a drawdown to give everything else a head start, and yet we still beat all these other assets and individual stocks that have performed very well over the last several years as well. So what you're looking at here is what's called a distribution, or it's kind of like a histogram. It's a distribution of the price returns. These are the daily price changes. So this is a good way of understanding the market from a way that I view it. You can see that the normal distribution in green is actually what the price returns for an asset should look like. This is kind of prescriptive. Most assets don't behave like this, even stocks, for example. But you can see here that what actually happens with Bitcoin is that a lot of the time, not much happens, which is all of the return distributions are clustered around 0%, slightly above 0%. But then occasionally, very rarely, a lot of things happen. You've got massive price movements on single days, up or down, and you don't really have a whole bunch of the mid-range stuff. Either nothing really happens or massive moves happen. This is typical of stocks, actually. So this is called kurtosis, where you have an enormous discrepancy in the distribution. However, you can still see that if you were fitting the normal curve to this, you could modify it slightly to bring the edges in here. So just remember that it's the Bitcoin market is punctuated by enormous moves and then a whole lot of nothing. Right, so if we're actually taking the price returns and we start to look at it over longer periods of time, you can see here the daily returns. This is kind of like the previous slide. Not a whole lot of anything happens, and then as we get to weeks, it starts to spread out a little further, and we have big weeks and small weeks. But as we get out into monthly returns, you can see something very weird starts to happen, and the distribution gets skewed right out to the right-hand side on the positive returns aspect of it. Now, this is an idealized version of that same curve, and when I think about the price behavior of Bitcoin, this is actually what I see in my mind. You can see here that, and please ignore the numbers. It's not accurate. I took this from somewhere else. You can see here that when we're investing in Bitcoin, what's actually happening is that the prices are constrained at a maximum loss. You can only lose everything that you have, but not more. But when you gain, you can potentially gain out to infinity. This is why sometimes Bitcoin is referred to as a call option, is because this payout distribution really gives you unlimited upside, but for a fixed downside potential. If we were actually drawing this with Bitcoin returns, this number 2 here would probably be a number 1 to represent 100% of your starting capital. And then you could go out to infinity, or you could go down to 0 capital, but you can double, triple, quadruple all the way out depending on how far you want to take it. So coming to terms with these behaviors is not quite complete until one fully considers the mathematical implications of Bitcoin's asymmetrical performance. Additionally, being a naturally unlevered asset, an investor can take on a fixed level of risk, maximum 100% loss, for hypothetically unlimited gains. Bitcoin is not a CFD. It's not an option, strictly speaking. There are no margin calls and there are no margin loans. It's just pure investment savagery. Now, let's have a brief look here at the quality of the returns. You can see here that if we're looking at high-performing stocks that you all know about, and stock market indexes and everything, this pink line represents equality between risk and return. This is the 1-to-1 line. So you can see here, if we're taking on 80% risk, we're going to be receiving 80% return, hypothetically, if our assets stuck along this line. What we actually want to see are assets that give us more returns than they do with risk. So you can see here that because Bitcoin is on the top of the line over here, it's actually, even though the risk is still quite high, we're receiving more returns than we are receiving in risk, which makes it an excellent asset. This displayed on a rolling basis over any 4-year period, you can see that there was actually no point in history where Bitcoin wasn't the superior risk-adjusted asset in the entire world, which is quite incredible, honestly. We have to have a quick look at drawdowns, though. Drawdown frequency is far more often than other assets, where every few years you can receive up to an 80% drawdown. You can see it's getting slightly less over time, but the average drawdown of about 50% can happen almost every year. So we need to be very careful with what we're doing, always thinking about what the worst case scenario is and positioning ourselves so that when we do receive giant drawdowns that we're ready to go. And this is pretty much what Daniel's dip buying bot is for. But within this within the context of swing trading, we're going to be looking at that as well. Okay, so let's look at expanding on the Bitcoin analysis from unit number 1, analysis philosophy. Quantitative versus qualitative. This one is very important to me. Quantitative essentially means numbers and numerical things that are factual data points. And qualitative is like stories, things that you're trying to derive from logic and reasoning and so on and so forth. You may notice when first learning how to invest that there is a lot of talk going on, ideas here and there, lots of opinions. Trying to derive a prediction using stories and the logic of other unsuccessful investors is no different to apes bashing rocks against other rocks. They think they're doing something, but no actual progress is being made. This is because stories come riddled with human cognitive biases and heuristics. The market deals in probabilities, not stories, in my opinion. In this respect, quantitative analysis is superior to qualitative analysis. Pulled this picture of the mind because ultimately, if you're not thinking in the forms of principles, maths, and tested processes, really you're just kind of making things up, I believe. You'll notice that from Unit 1, I took the slide from Unit 1, you'll notice that when I went through analysis methods and their reliability, there wasn't a single qualitative method of analysis in this list. They're all quantitative. Every single one of these relies on some sort of data set, rule-based system, or maths. Because basically, if what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to take everything I do, and you, by extension, from a space of mostly made-up stuff in faith, all the way up to empirical evidence. If you're smart, if you're a disciplined student, you'll recognize this diagram from a previous lecture, and you'll understand exactly where I'm coming from here. I won't harp on it too much because you've already seen this before, but this is critical because, like I said, this fits into my philosophy of trying to get rich for sure. We're trying to engineer and eliminate everything that can't be testable eliminate all this bullshit. We're trying to get rid of it. Okay, so let's get into some slightly more meatier stuff now. Some of you will recognize this again, but I just wanted to bring it up in the lecture so that you can hear me talking about it. There are 3 types of tactical principles when it comes to investing. Is it expensive or cheap? All right, this is the first one. This is the least difficult of the 3 different tactical principles of investing over a long period of time. So we're talking years here. It's hard because things that are very expensive can keep getting more expensive, and things that are cheap can keep getting cheaper. This is difficult due to noise and randomness, but it can be used in mean reversion strategies. You can see here, this particular one, beam indicator, very basic, is just to basically show how expensive and cheap works. You can see here that it would be useful for picking the top and bottom in this particular section of the market during this time. Wasn't useful recently, but this is a good indication of what I mean by expensive or cheap, overbought and oversold. And price trends. So is it trending up or down? This type of methodology is often wrong in ranging markets. You get whiplashed and you get tons and tons of false signals which eat away at your account. So it's wrong in ranging markets often, but it gives you exposure to large moves when they occur. It's harder than number 1, but it's still easier than number 3. In case you're curious about this one, this is nothing special. I cherry-picked this particular thing just to show the example of what a trend following strategy looks like. This one blew up the account over here and semi-blew up the account over here. Hypothetically, I didn't run this one, but yeah, just to give you an idea of what trend following is meant to achieve. It's kind of basically what my entire strategy is meant to look like in practice. But it's all easier than number 3, which is predicting the future. Where is it going to go to next and when? Impossible to answer, but easy to ask. Hence why it's the first question most novices ask. They don't understand that it can't be done. No one actually knows where anything is going in the future, but we have probabilistic methods of entering and exiting the market when there is a high probability of making money. Fucking don't ask me for my price targets. Right. That being said, experience does give insights. This is one of the moments where I was kind of brought out from the fray within the war room. I made a call that basically picked the top in Ethereum within a few dollars and warned everybody about it. It wasn't a part of my actual strategy at the time, but yeah, there was a lot of guys that acted on this and took their profits pretty much at the exact top of the market, thanks to my call, which I was very happy to provide that service for them. Was slightly less accurate on Bitcoin, but it still worked out quite well. So yeah, you can call that predicting the future. You can call it whatever you want. Essentially, it was just the spider's web of data points in my mind, all kind of coming together at the same time with experience. You can develop this too over time, but it takes a good understanding of the fundamentals first before you get too advanced. Now, this is one of the sheets that I use to track a lot of my information. You can see over here that some of the websites that I use for some of my my data points, that's all open right there. You can just basically copy and paste that into your browser or like type it into your browser, do some searching yourself. What I'm going to be doing is I'm actually going to be going through every single one of these indicators and describing to you where it sits within my trading philosophy, the importance I place on them, how I use them, and how you can use them as well to make better decisions with your trading and essentially try and get to the point that I'm at. Market correlation is another big one that I like, which it really doesn't have anything to do with overbought, oversold. It's kind of like in its own little realm, and it can get quite complex. I use this table here. I keep refreshing it all the time, trying to get the correlations from all the different asset classes: stocks, US dollar, gold, break-evens, bonds, and the VIX, and just essentially comparing that to all the different assets. This leads to a couple of important implications. Bitcoin is correlated to major stock market declines. So I'll just go back one second. Whoop. You can see here that it's slightly correlated to the stock market at the moment. It's doing quite well. Bonds will ignore that for the moment. So Bitcoin is correlated to major stock market declines. Sometimes it's not really correlated to smaller declines, which is weird. It's only when the stock market starts to accelerate to a certain point where it's like a catastrophe that Bitcoin goes along for the ride. Therefore, watching for recessions and transient volatility in stocks can be of importance. So I cover this type of stuff when it comes to stocks in the stocks channel. I'm not super active in there at the moment, but there can be information that I'll be sharing in there on this. Some short-term moves in the US dollar can affect Bitcoin because, after all, Bitcoin is denominated in US dollar. If the US dollar becomes stronger, that's going to affect the ratio and actually bring down Bitcoin. So yeah, that can affect risk assets as well, and everything kind of feeds into itself. So that can be important to watch sometimes. Methods of detecting probabilistic price ranges in traditional assets. To fully exploit correlations can be found at my fractal range or purchased from Hedgeye, which is what I use, to help you determine the likelihood of future moves. Correlation trading is not essential to swing trading, but it does help a lot, and it also gets you into that mindset of being able to kind of like I wouldn't say see the future, but like really get an understanding of like the behavior of the market, really the sentiment of the market, like through pure price. So you need to rely on external data sets less.